Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and this is AP Physics Essentials video 115. It's on standing waves. Standing waves are like they sound. They're waves that appear to stand still. And so an example of a sound standing wave is the waves found inside a vuvuzela. And so you blow on it, you get that sound. You blow it with a higher frequency, and then you could even try to pierce your lips a little bit more and get an even higher frequency. But what's happening is you have these specific standing waves that sit within the chamber of the vuvuzela. Now, a wine glass works the same way. If you rub your finger with a little bit of water around the surface of it, what you can do is generate these standing waves inside the wine glass. What you're doing is vibrating the sides, and as you do that, you're vibrating the air, and since you have a standing wave inside there, it makes this pitch. Add water to it, and you're going to have a slightly different pitch. And so waves can either be traveling or standing waves. Traveling waves will move from one place to another, and standing waves will appear to stand still. Now when you look at it, it's kind of an illusion. They're standing still, but the traveling waves are bouncing back and forth. In other words, they're being reflected off the boundaries, and then there's interference to create these standing waves. And so if we look at this animation, the dark wave is going to be the standing wave, but in the background you can see the blue and the red waves that are bouncing back and forth and back and forth, and it's the summation of them that creates the standing wave. Now if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all, and that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out, and we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth.
The spiritual aspects and why science uses matter to try to define matter, which again, a particle, you can't even, what a particle of what is it a part of? How can a particle be used to describe another particle?
Right.
Again, it's like saying the left side of the seesaw is responsible for the right side's motion, but yet any numbskull can look at the center of the seesaw and see that fulcrum there that doesn't move. You know, and that's one thing science can't see, so yet they deny it exists.
Welcome to the chemistry question. Jordan here. I talked in a recent video about models of the atom and how our views of the atom have changed over time. And it talks about how the electron cloud model is the current model of the atom. Last week, the first photo of a hydrogen atom was taken using a quantum microscope. The image confirms hydrogen's wave function. That is, we see the electron modeling a probability cloud around the atom, with regions of high intensity where expected, as well as nodes where the electron does not appear. That is, we see the electron modeling a probability cloud around the atom, with regions of high intensity where expected, as well as nodes where the electron does not appear. Hydrogen was chosen because it has the simplest electron configuration, just one electron in the lowest energy state. The research team is going to attempt to get an image of helium next. Heavier elements will be much more difficult, however. Thank you for watching the chemistry question. Be sure to subscribe and leave any questions or suggestions in the comments below. Until next time.
Fulcrum there that doesn't move. You know, and that's one thing science can't see, so yet they deny it exists. It's not just I can't see it or I don't know it's there. It's that, no, that doesn't exist. It must be something in the seesaw, the plank of wood itself. Let's look at this particle of the wood and try to use that to describe the motion of the wood. Well, that kind of approach is failing. I mean, there's no, it leaves you with all these disproportionate theories that they're trying to marry together. You have, 100 different explanations, from string theory to the 500th Planck, all the way down to quantum this and quantum that, and somewhere they're trying to marry all these disproportionate theories together to create one big grand unified theory. Well, less is more. The simplest explanation is always the truest, and I have not encountered a model yet that's simpler than the cubic wave field model and more explanatory in the effects of motion, because I myself know that even at the center of myself, when I calm myself from an emotional, back and forth, I can think more clearly. I mean, you don't have clear thoughts in horizontal thinking. You're stuck on the seesaw. But when you become vertical, when you think vertically like the great geniuses do, you complete the cross and you can access the totality of your being to bring into existence new ways, new approaches, solutions, if you will. They don't call it a solution for nothing. I mean, you're bringing it down where it never existed into being. And so you're learning to manifest creative principles within your own life that, you know, how can you fix somebody else if you can't even fix yourself? That's, you know, again, the great self-work is what all this philosophy is here to do. The science is the act of acting out your concepts into physical form. There's a very real process to that. And I think it's what makes their work some of the greatest work out there. It's inspirational.
Now, if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all. And that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out. And we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth.
Please explain briefly what you mean by the term extending the fulcrum. In my understanding, the fulcrum is the stand that supports the seesaw. Do you mean by extension to make it higher? Or do you mean to make the seesaw longer? I mean to make the extension, the fulcrum of the seesaw. The fulcrum is there in nature always. The moment you express a desire to do something, to make an action, then you extend from the fulcrum both ways. You make the seesaw. That's what it is to extend it, the amount of energy that you have. If you do not extend the fulcrum, you seemingly extend it. You seemingly divide its power. Because children on either end of the seesaw can express the power of motion. But that is all they do, express the power of motion. And that power of motion they express is the power borrowed from the stillness of the fulcrum at the center. I do not always have to like to say it's a seeming extension, because the universe is only seeming. Perhaps if I use the word, it's a thought extension. And it is. It's an imagined extension. In your thinking, you imagine. And you cannot imagine objectively without creating motion objectively in your imagining. And so it is in the thinking process of nature there seems to be an extension or division which takes power or borrows seeming power without borrowing it, but seeming to. Before I say it, the extension of power is like a person pulling away from the fulcrum with an elastic band that stretches and strains and makes it harder and harder and harder to pull away from it. But on the opposite side, there's equal pulling away to balance that pulling. But the power is in the fulcrum. Not in the, for instance, if you stood out on the prairie and pulled at a rope, you have no difficulty pulling at that rope. It does not pull you back, but you hit the post there, and the post does not move. And you take an elastic band and you hitch it to it, and you stretch away from it. You find it pulling back. Therefore, you've created two conditions at the same time. You've created condition of extension and condition of expansion, and of retraction. That's the action and reaction nature. From the zero, you have extended in every direction, because you cannot extend this direction from the fulcrum without extending in the opposite direction to balance it. The two conditions of decentration and concentration of mental thinking have been established in what we call an electric current. If you let that elastic go, it will go back to where it started from and disappear in the fulcrum. That fulcrum is the zero. That which we borrowed from the fulcrum is a multiplication of that zero plus and minus. One balancing the other, one offsetting the other. You borrowed 50 from there by your pulling, 50 plus. On the opposite side of that is a 50 minus. 50 minus and 50 plus, total together a zero. Nothing in nature ever exceeds zero. It seems to. And so we have multiplying and divided universe into pairs of opposite conditions of compression and expansion, two opposite pressures which make it possible to run our engines and do all the things we have and run the engine of our heartbeat and so forth. But the fulcrum of every extension, every seesaw motion, the fulcrum never moves. That is its zero, and the elastic bands will pull together and disappear into the light from which it came, into the zero light from which it came, to divide itself into two lights that will illumine the bodies that have extended from it. Those lights illumine and warm and heat and cool the bodies that are extended from it to make a universe like that. To make a universe that fits the imaginings of your mind. When it retracts back to that, there's no more warmth to warm the bodies, no more light to light the bodies. The imagined universe disappears insofar as that one desire is concerned. Life has appeared and disappeared in death, and it will again reappear. The extension of the fulcrum and its multiplication to a point of equal potential to that which is borrowed from the fulcrum is right, with all of the effects that is created by so doing, the effects of warmth and heat and cool and growth and decay and moisture that make up this universe. And when that elastic band pulls that back into the fulcrum, there's an absolute disappearance of all of it. The whole universe can't disappear at once because it isn't created that way. But that one pulsation will disappear. And the pulsations which appear by extending the fulcrum and retracting, those pulsations begin with an incredible speed, with an incredibly small duration. Frequencies of millions and millions of extensions and retractions. The seesaw extending and retracting so that its frequency is 186,000 miles a second. The frequency is growing larger, duration, accumulating time until the frequencies are so slow they'll give you 1 in 50 years. Of a tree, perhaps. The ant the elephant, the sun, the solar system. Multiply time, multiply frequency, multiply the ability to accumulate these frequencies and wind them up to retard time for the sake of multiplying power. That's the lever principle. That's the fulcrum in lever principle. Shorten the lever, you lose time and you gain power. A man, by shortening the lever sufficiently and getting on the long end of it, can lift tons. Without that lever, he could only lift 100, 150 pounds with the lever and fulcrum of his own body. He's limited to that, but with the, as Archimedes said, give me a fulcrum and a lever long enough and I could move the universe. It's true. Does light spring spontaneously from nature? A college professor said it did not. There is nothing spontaneous in nature, in the sense that it is used. Everything in nature is planned. Everything in nature is the result of a desire to become, a desire to express in motion the idea of mind. Nothing spontaneous happens in your kitchen. In motion, the idea of mind. Nothing spontaneous happens in your kitchen after the dinner dishes have gone there. A desire to reassort them is followed by action. And the fulfillment of your desire takes place by action. A word spontaneous is used often in the relation of combustion, spontaneous combustion. If you leave a pile of refuse out somewhere and some kindlings in it, or even some decaying vegetation and earth that will burst into flame. That's not spontaneous combustion. That's the result of accumulated power, accumulated power of decay.
Wave universe, 9 octaves. Gases begin the first octave, very dense metals, and the 9th octave, like plutonium, being the last of the natural octave, or last of the natural elements. So you have very few rings with gases. You start at hydrogen, 1 electron or whatever. They call it an electron. There's no such thing, but it's more of a ring. And that ring I kind of like to use these words. There's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal of direction back out to stillness. there's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal direction back out to stillness. And the way you can look at that too in nature is the breath. You breathe in, you start at 0, you breathe in, you stop at 0, reverse direction and exhale out to do it again. So Walter's primary law is balance. If you need 2 words, rhythmic balance. If you need 3 words, rhythmic balanced interchange. And basically what that is a series of repetitions that repeats eternally. So you have removed the need for the Big Bang. And this is basically a mind wave universe that rotates on the still white magnetic light. Anywhere you look, the center of any object is a point of gravity. Gravity is not an inward pulling force. In Russell science, it is stillness, which divides into a north and south shaft upon which motion then rotates. So wherever there is a center of gravity, there is motion surrounding it, and that center of gravity can be likened to God. It means the same thing pretty much. Gravity and God are one in that sense.
Now, if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all. And that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out. And we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth. And so an example of this could be found in instruments, for example. So a string instrument is going to be fixed at either end, and this animation is a good example of that. It's fixed on either end, and as the waves bounce back and forth, you create these standing waves. If we shorten that, like on a guitar, then we can get different pitches. A tube is going to be the same way. A tube could be open on both ends like a flute, or it could be closed on one end like a vuvuzela, and that's going to create these standing waves as well. So let's start with traveling versus standing waves. And so this PHET simulation, I'm generating some waves. Those waves, and this is just kind of theoretical, are moving out the door, and then they've moved on forever. But if we add a boundary on the other side, in other words, if we add a fixed boundary, you can see now there's a reflection back. So those waves didn't just keep going, they bounced back, and now they're going to bounce back again. And as that wave goes back and forth, you can see that we're starting to generate these standing waves. And you can even see those nodes and those antinodes. In other words, those areas where it's not moving and those areas where it's moving quite a bit. So this is an animation of standing waves. And so what we're doing is as the blue wave moves to the right, becomes the red wave, which moves back to the left, and it just keeps going and going and going. We're getting destructive interference. That's causing these nodes where they cancel each other out. And then we have constructive interference, and that's creating these antinodes where those two waves add together to make a much bigger wave. Now, an example of this, if you've ever played baseball before, when you hit the ball, sometimes you'll hit it and the bat will kind of buzz in your hands. In other words, it vibrates quite a bit. And the reason why is that you're hitting the ball on an antinode, an area where the waves going up and down the bat are actually constructively interfering to create a huge vibration there. And we refer to it as the sweet spot, the spot on a bat where the node is, where you don't have much vibration, that you hit the ball and you don't feel really any vibration at all.
Clearly ripe for some new approach. And that was provided by a remarkable group of thinkers who flourished in Greece during the golden age of that country's history. The source of order in the universe, these men said, was mind. And the proper way of arriving at general principles was to apply insight and reasoning. The result of that change in policy was to concentrate attention on the causes of physical phenomena rather than on the phenomena themselves. Where the Egyptians saw only the fact that a rock falls if it's released from a height, the Greeks looked for the cause of the fall. Now they reasoned that everything must have its natural place. So the rock in falling then was merely seeking for its natural place. In this way, by providing an explanation for what happened, they remedied the chief defect of the previous inductive theories. Similarly, they reasoned, as Professor Meyer indicated, that while the earth is obviously imperfect, the heavens are perfect. And all heavenly motions must then take the perfect form, that of a circle.
The eternal you is that center, and your eternal body is that series of 4 rings of fluorescent light, which is eternally wrapped around that centering soul of the eternal you. Those 4 rings are eternal records of you. They are as immortal as you are immortal. They are the microfilm of you yourself.
Every expression of motion is in the octave wave, and I knew the wave. And in the wave is the secret of creation, and I had that. I knew it in a timeless flash. And God said to me, there will be those who will question. There will be those who doubt. There will be those who crucify you. I give you to thee a sign by which thou canst prove thyself.
How many wavelengths away from source 1 is this point? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4 wavelengths. I'm going to call this P. Okay? So what I'm counting is crest, 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 crest. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I can say then is that the distance between S1 and P, okay, so you know from math class, if you put a line over top, it means line S1 to P. Well, maybe they don't teach you that, I'm not sure, but if you put a line over top, it means a line between these 2 points equals 4 wavelengths. A line from S2 to P equals, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4 wavelengths. So let's write down an important note right now. Note, any point along C, the central maximum, any point along C will be an equal number of wavelengths. Why can't I? Oh, that's what I want. Equal number of wavelengths from S1 and S2. So what is the result of that? This means there will be constructive interference along C. Okay, you will always have constructive interference along C, this line here, because you always have an exact equal number of wavelengths coming. And I'm going to draw this in just to try to help you visualize. Okay, so if we have like this kind of thing going on here, and this kind of thing going on here, you'll notice that both of these are on the upswing. They're both at the crest point exactly when they meet here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. No matter where I do that, if I go to the next one, it'll be the same, but it'll be 5. If I go here, it'll be 5 troughs, right? If I come to the middle, it's
Every expression of motion is in the octave wave, and I knew the wave. And in the wave is the secret of creation, and I had that. I knew it in a timeless flash. The illusion of motion deceives everyone, so that the profound laws have been written by scientists which don't have the slightest foundation of truth in them, much less the very fundamental laws that I could see behind the scenes. When I came back, I bought textbooks to find out the names of that which I knew in space, in the universe, in another way as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, and back to 0. That is all I needed to know. And the names of those 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. are in textbooks. Lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, one series of elements after another. But to me they were always 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 in everything. Whether that was the octave spectrum of color or the octave on the piano.
stationary wave occurs when two sets of waves of the same amplitude and the same frequency, which are propagating in the same medium but in opposite directions, overlap. In a stationary wave, each point of the wave performs oscillations around the position of equilibrium.
These waves of light emerge from their fulcrum zeros and disappear into them in endless repetitions forever and ever. Knowledge is solely an attribute of the mind. Sensation is solely an attribute of the body. Mind is static light, the one and only power source of this universe. Thus thinking, you see what man calls life in a new light. You see it as the manner in which God manifests the idea of light and eternal life by dividing his one idea into countless pairs of many seemingly separate ideas, for that is what vibrating light waves are. These waves of light emerge from their fulcrum zeros and disappear into them in endless repetitions forever and ever. The wave is an extension of heaven to earth and back again. The wave is a projection from the spiritual universe of rest to a resting point in the physical universe, and back again to the spiritual universe for renewal of power to repeat the journey. Another way of saying it is that the wave is an emergence from the static condition of rest through the dynamic condition of motion to the static condition and back again, or that it is an extension of cause through effect and back again through effect to cause. Between every pulsation of movement, there is a period of stillness, which divides every compression-expansion sequence. You can knowingly say that the power expressed in motion is not really in the motion, but is in the stillness which divides motion. If that is true, life itself, which is presumed to be motion, must have its source in eternal rest. If death is presumed to be non-motion, and life is dependent upon it to express life, the only possible conclusion is that life is two ways, both of which have their source in rest.
And the reason why is that you're hitting the ball on an antinode, an area where the waves going up and down the bat are actually constructively interfering to create a huge vibration there. And we refer to it as the sweet spot, the spot on a bat where the node is, where you don't have much vibration, that you hit the ball and you don't feel really any vibration at all. And so let's go through experimentation. So this is a SimBucket simulation. What we're doing is looking at standing waves. The first one we're going to look at is when you have two fixed ends. So an example of this could be a guitar. And so what you do is you have a string, you hold it on one side, and then you pluck it, and you're going to have vibration. So what do you get? Waves going back and forth and back and forth. What's the standing wave then? The standing wave is going to be that green wave in this simulation. It's that wave that is the addition of the other waves. What's interesting in a guitar is that you don't only have one, what we call harmonic, or one standing wave, but you can have multiple standing waves. Now in all these standing waves, what makes them the same is that we have a node on either side. In other words, there's no net movement on either side of that string. If we look at an instrument like a tuba or a vuvuzela, what is the characteristic of that? Well, we're vibrating it, but you can see that on the left side we have a node. It's not vibrating, but we have an antinode at the right side. So in each of these harmonics, the left side is going to be a node. It's not going to move at all, but the right side is going to be an antinode. And so we still have those traveling waves going back and forth and back and forth. It's just that one of those ends is free to create an antinode, and then we just have reflection off of that end. These are all the different harmonics. What keeps them all in common is the node on the left, antinode on the right. If we then look at something that has two open ends, like a flute you don't blow in one end. You're blowing on the top to create the vibration, or a pan flute would be an example of that. And so what's going to create the standing wave here? Well, in this first harmonic, we have the node in the middle, and then we have antinodes on either side. Now we have two nodes near the middle, antinodes on the side. So what's the characteristic of a standing wave in a chamber that has two open ends? It's always going to be an antinode on either side. But depending on the frequency, we can get different pitches as we blow through. Rubens tube is a really cool example of that. In a Rubens tube, what you do is you fill up a chamber with gas, a gas that's flammable. And so this guy's lighting the chamber. So we're having flames coming out of the top. But on a Rubens tube, you put a speaker on the side. And what that speaker does is create these longitudinal waves. Those longitudinal waves, as they move through, will create areas where there's a lot of compression. And in an area where there's a lot of compression or antinodes, then the gas really can't make its way out. And so it'll be really low there, but at the nodes, it'll actually come out quite a bit. And so did you learn to predict the properties of standing waves? They result from reflection of these traveling waves. Could you collect data? Again, I use the SimBucket simulation to do that. And then finally, could you describe examples of when this occurs, standing waves? Musical instruments are good, baseball bats are great, and I hope that was helpful.
Depends on the location of a given point. The points known as antinodes oscillate from a position of equilibrium to a maximum distance which is equal to twice the amplitude of the overlapping waves. The points known as nodes, however, always remain in the position of equilibrium. All other points perform oscillations with an amplitude which is lower than the maximum.
That's so a blending of lots of little energy jumps gives rise to what appears on a large scale as a very smooth, continuous energy exchange.
Because the wave structures have to be like waves on a string. You have a violin string, you pluck it, always has the same note. That is, the waves on it are a pattern.
Certain frequency of a standing wave.
Yeah, it's just what they call a standing wave. Kids wave a jump rope up and down. It has always a fixed pattern. Well, the wave patterns of atoms and molecules have fixed patterns. When energy changes, it changes moving from one pattern to another pattern.
And only certain are allowed, and that explains why
and only certain
energy states are allowed. Okay.
Together, their waves join. Forces between particles. Research in energy transfer has shown that it is always quantum mechanics which gives the correct description. That is, one particle changes a quantum wave state. For example, that might be a source, and somewhere else, another particle changes its state exactly the opposite way. This one goes down a certain amount of energy, and this one will go up a certain amount of energy. Exactly, that's the conservation of energy. We realize that all energy is transferred in this way. Therefore, the only conclusion is that the electric fields are descriptions of large numbers of the quantum transfers.
That's so a blending of lots of little energy jumps gives rise to what appears on a large scale as a very smooth continuous energy exchange. But when we started looking closely enough at one electron in a molecule losing energy to another electron somewhere else, we found that it was in bits.
Someone in
This is
charge
what Max Planck did in 1900, didn't he?
Planck discovered this. A single particle all by itself doesn't do very much. But if you take two particles, a proton and an electron, and you put them together, their waves join, and their waves join with certain rules. Electron waves will form patterns. The violinist knows that there's patterns inside that violin case. So, in the same way, these patterns form between particles. Helium is more complex than hydrogen, or you combine the hydrogen with an oxygen, and you get very, very, very complex arrangements. And of course, every chemist and a biologist knows these arrangements as the atomic table. Any exchange in one of these complex wave structures can only happen if it goes to one wave structure to another wave structure. It can't go halfway between, because the wave structures have to be like waves on a string. You have a violin string, you pluck it, always has the same note. That is, the waves on it are a pattern.
Certain frequency of a standing wave.
Yeah, it's just what they call a standing wave. The kids wave a jump rope up and down. It has always a fixed pattern. Only the wave patterns of atoms and molecules have fixed patterns. When energy changes, it changes moving from one pattern to another pattern.
And only certain are allowed, and that explains why
And only certain
energy states are allowed. Okay.
People ask me, why did you become a physicist? The fact of the matter is, I never became a physicist. I wanted to be a fix-up man.
William Clifford was a brilliant mathematician. He understood from Maxwell's equations that there had to be solutions for matter, and he worked out that matter must be standing waves of electromagnetism. Unfortunately, he died before these ideas caught on, and the idea got lost.
Okay, so how did you discover the spherical standing wave structure?
I was curious. 1955, I took a course in quantum mechanics. And this was a graduate course. And I had never had a course, any course in quantum mechanics. I assumed I was very stupid. I never understood the origin of de Broglie waves, which says that a particle goes along like this. It has a wave which is inversely proportional to its momentum. Planck's constant divided by the mass times the velocity. That's called the de Broglie wavelength, because de Broglie first proposed it. And of course, de Broglie didn't know where it came from either. Nobody ever knew. But I didn't know that they didn't know.
So you thought you were
I just
silly.
thought I was stupid. I never opened my mouth in a class. 30 years later, I just kept thinking about that thing, and it just bothered me all the time. One day I was reading a book called All About Waves by a professor at Harvard. It suddenly occurred to me that there must be some kind of a complicated Doppler going on. I wrote down a few equations. I discovered that only if you have a combination of an inward wave and an outward wave do you get the de Broglie wavelengths.
You're talking about a combination of an inward wave and an outward wave of two different particles.
Yeah, two different particles.
So you're talking about an interaction of four waves.
Right. There's a particle here, a particle there.
One's moving relative to the other.
So there is relative motion. Therefore, if you write these equations out, you get that the de Broglie wavelength is there. And I was also amazed to discover that Einstein's increase of mass was there. All the things which happen with relative velocity showed up. And I said to myself, this is so simple. I didn't think I discovered anything.
I must admit, when you tell me this, Marlon, it sort of gives a shiver down my spine.
Oh, yeah?
Because what you're telling me is that you've united quantum theory with Einstein's special relativity.
Yeah.
In that one equation.
Yeah, I did.
That's what you're telling me, isn't it?
But this seems so simple to me because these simple bits of algebra weren't all that complicated. So I says, yeah, this is a natural result. I'm sure somebody else has already found this because people investigated quantum theory and waves, and people have been using in and out waves for 30 years. They always thought they were imaginary, though. I realized it. I said, gee, I really got something. So I kept on studying and investigating it. And, of course, the result is this book. This tells all of that work.
Every single thing that exists, and I'm not kidding, everything that exists springs out of this womb, this football-like shape. It sounds like a wild, improbable, crazy thing to say, but it's absolutely true.
I developed a way of looking at this through the intricate order that's based really on quantum theory. And the way it works is to consider that there's a wave. You may think of this wave coming from outside, from the whole universe, which converges to a point and then diverges again. Now, it links everything. It means that everything is internally related to everything. Now,
Of course, the real world's a bit more complicated than this little circular dish. We don't know whether it has a circular boundary or not. That doesn't really matter. But the thing is, it is three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. So the wave structures are likely to be rather more complicated than this. However, we can understand that in a universe full of vibration, that centers can exist which have particle-like properties, which will have different phases that can account for the different charges of different particles, but that these are standing waves, and that the energy coming into each one and the energy going out of each one is the same energy that passes through the center as the concentric waves converge on the spot and then go out, and that the arrangement of all of these different ones is supporting the phases of the waves of all other particles. Every particle in the universe is being constantly recreated by the energy of all other particles. This is something which is not really understood by physicists, and I think it's a very important point. If we want to understand how the universe works, we do need to say that nature actually works like this.
Animations is Gabriel Lafreniere, and he showed here how a wave is made from the incoming part, a standing wave, plus the outgoing part. These two components together make a standing wave, which you can see here. So it appears to just stand in space, but it's actually composed of the inwards and outwards waves. Of course, the outwards wave is just the inwards wave after it has passed through the center and comes out again of the spherical wave descending on a point. So this type of wave has the correct properties that we need to explain particles. If the particle is in motion, then the point at which it's converging has to be moving, so the waves are converging on a point and coming out from a point in opposite ways. So when you get the standing wave, you get this suddenly a strange effect where the wave that we saw before has superimposed on it these other bands of alternating phase, and these are de Broglie waves. all these calculations, as we had all managed to derive these calculations that show the de Broglie waves from this understanding of standing waves, but in this animation Gabriel has made it very clear what's actually going on, and the understanding of all of these things. It's clear that these are real waves. Real waves are happening that explain the nature of matter as being standing waves.
The eternal you is that center, and your eternal body is that series of 4 rings of fluorescent light, which is eternally wrapped around that centering soul of the eternal you. Those 4 rings are eternal records of you. They are as immortal as you are immortal. They are the microfilm of you yourself.
Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Noory. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. Up next, Dr. Eben Alexander joins us. An incredible story, Proof of Heaven. That's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. For the next couple hours, you're going to hear an incredible story, a story we talked about several weeks ago. Dr. Eben Alexander, a renowned academic neurosurgeon, spent 54 years honing these scientific skills worldview. He thought he knew how the brain and mind worked, but a near-death experience in which he was driven to the brink of death and spent a week deep in a coma with a brain infection changed all of that. He's written his book and his story, Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, and he's with us right now. Dr. Eben Alexander. Eben, how are you?
I'm doing well, George. How about you?
Good. It's good to have you on. Did you ever expect this kind of notoriety after coming out with this story?
Well, I expected it would definitely have an impact, but it's far kind of outgrown very quickly what I thought would happen, at least at the introduction.
Our investigative reporter who's going to do a segment on you at the end of November, Linda Moulton Howe, said that she had a chance to interview you today.
Oh, yeah, we had a great talk.
All excited. She's a great reporter, and this is just, it's an incredible story. I want you to tell us what happened to you, the meningitis, and after that, let's talk a little bit about your belief system prior to this thing happening to you. But how did you get sick? What happened?
Well, it struck me like a freight train. I mean, out of the blue. This was 4:30 in the morning on November the 10th of 2008, just about 4 years ago, and I'd been very healthy and woke up that morning with severe back pain, and thought that maybe if I could get in a warm bath, that would help, and it only got worse, and then I could barely get back to the bed, and my wife was rubbing my back, trying to make me feel better, and that was not working. Then my son, Bond, who at that time was 10 years old, came in the room, realized I hadn't left for work yet, and he started rubbing my temples, and I realized I had a very severe headache. I mean, like he drove a white-hot railroad spike right through my head.
Oh,
and my last words to my wife were, don't call 911, you know, trust me, I'm a doctor, this is muscle spasm, and then I was gone for a week.
Well, and now let's go back. Prior to this episode occurring, and we're going to get into the things that happened to you when you were in this situation, in this coma, what was your belief system about life after death?
The eternal you is that center, and your eternal body is that series of 4 rings of fluorescent light, which is eternally wrapped around that centering soul of the eternal you. Those 4 rings are eternal records of you. They are as immortal as you are immortal. They are the microfilm of you yourself.
Every expression of motion is in the octave wave, and I knew the wave. And in the wave is the secret of creation, and I had that. I knew it in a timeless flash. And God said to me, there will be those who will question. There will be those who doubt. There will be those who crucify you. I give you to thee a sign by which thou canst prove thyself. Thou who hast never known a chemist's laboratory shall know chemistry beyond men. To thee all chemists will come for knowledge of the light. Thou who hast never known the stars, save with thine adoring eyes, shall know the stars beyond all men. All astronomers will come to thee for the new mappings of the universe of the stars, which thou shalt give to them. To thee who study mathematics was a dreary thing. Shall I give the master key to mathematics? To thee all mathematicians will come for knowledge of the key to motion and the curvature of space. And one thing after another like that, I'm trying to recall the exact words from the Divine Iliad. That was to be a sign whereby I could prove my right to speak with authority. And the signs never failed. And with them came the admonition that I should keep perfectly quiet and not herald my messengership for 7 years, but should prepare for the first rehearsal of it by thine written word.
The electrochemical records of the zero seed of all things are the zero elements, which are known as the inert gases, from which center of the fulcrum zero of polarity all polarizing body forms extend to manifest vitalizing life, and return as depolarizing forms to manifest devitalizing death.
The inert gases are God's recording and repeating system. They record, remember, and repeat all actions and reactions of all things from eternity unto eternity. They broadcast all of creation to all creation, and likewise receive the broadcasts of all creation for rebroadcasting to all creation.
The inert gases are zeros in the universal equilibrium. Polarity divides and extends the one light into electric thought wave cycles, which appear from the one still light as moving pairs of moving lights and disappear into that still light for reappearance forever without end.
The inert gases are the spiritual elements, which born and reborn the physical elements, and meticulously make spectrum records of their eternities of rebornings.
The inert gases center all elements from within to control their unfolding cycles of polarizing, depolarizing form, and balance them from without by two poles of still light to control the refolding of form into their zero seed.
The inert gases record purposeful unfoldings and give back to each corpuscle of motion its cell memory of purpose and its instinctive guidance.
They likewise give back to awakening consciousness the records of all cycles of soul awakening, which have been written in the soul seeds of all unfolding, refolding body forms.
The inert gases write down in God's book of light all that you and I and anyone has ever been. Likewise what the ant, the elephant, the tiger, violet, and bee have ever been, or have ever done since their beginnings, and give them back to them after every rest period which divides their cycles.
God's sole occupation is the building of moving body forms to simulate his one idea of cause and effect, which creation is.
There is a very definite bridge between God and man. It is invisible in the vacuum of the zero stillness of God's kingdom, but it has a visible link at every point where that bridge touches the shores of the action universe of motion. That is something which every man can understand, for he can hold the symbol of that great reality in his hand in the form of a simple seed.
He has never known, however, that in that imperishable seed, within that perishable acorn, which he holds in his hand, is the whole answer to where the oak tree comes from to live and where it goes when it dies. That is something which the physicist can more readily understand when you tell him that the imperishable, invisible seed within that acorn is an inert gas, or a combination of several octaves of inert gases.
God thinks in electric pulsations, which are recorded in motion as 4 pairs of rings, which are compressed into spheres. Each cyclic pulsation is manifested by the projection of 4 concentric light rings in one plane from one point of magnetic mind light, in which the red half of the spectrum is on the outside of the rings and the blue half is on the inside. These 4 rings are the seed of the octave wave and occupy that position in the wave known as the zero group of elements, or inert gases.
You will note that an inert gas marked 0 begins and ends each octave. The 9 inert gases are the shores of the visible universe, where the invisible bridges, which link mind and motion, touch the moving action universe. There are 9 of them because the bridge has 9 parts, which we might call entrances to mortality and exits to immortality. The wave is created by dividing the 4 sexless rings of the inert gases into 4 pairs of oppositely sex-conditioned rings and projecting them towards sex mates of adjoining wave fields to find balance and unity in each other. God's concentrative thinking compresses these mate rings as they are projected. This is the genero-active uphill flow of energy principle, which multiplies power and speed in the inverse ratio of the cube as they are thus centripetally projected until the red and blue pair of cyclonic vortices, thus resulting, collide at wave amplitudes midway between the 2 zero cathodes from which they were projected. This is the manner in which unbalanced and separated sexed pairs are united into the oneness of the 2 balanced and equal hemispheres of spherical incandescent suns.
Within the 4 zero rings of the wave is the cathode mother womb of space, which is seeking the outside to fulfill her office of borning the seed of the Father. To aid this process, the 4 pairs of projecting rings gradually close up their centering holes as the rings are compressed from their cone bases towards their apices, where the collision of sex mating completes the closing in the incandescent sphere thus formed.
Likewise, all chemical elements of the octaves are red and blue lights which are projected from the pure white light of their inert gases, which are their octave seed. They return to their invisible oneness by radioactive emanations, which are pure white incandescent microscopic suns. Man calls them alpha, beta, gamma, or helium rays, as they emanate from tungsten, actinium, radium, or uranium at almost the speed of light. Each of them is the seed for another body of its like kind, as suns are seed for all bodies.
There are 9 of these inert gases in nature, as you will see by the 9-stringed harp of the universe. The only difference in their structure is that each consecutive inert gas, from 1 to 9, is smaller than its predecessor, for each octave is a multiplication of its predecessor.
The upper diagram, marked AA, represents the creation of an octave of tones, beginning with the inert gas of 4 motionless rings, centered by the stillness of universal energy, to act as cathodes at both ends. This pair of 4 rings divide and extend their pairs of 4 rings toward approaching mates. Electric compression causes the rings to begin to spin, then to become smaller and turn faster as they approach the plane of collision, where all 4 pairs unite to form a sphere. This represents the centripetal half of the journey, which charges, polarizes, heats, and multiplies potential. These are the qualities necessary for increasingly vitalized life.
Observe carefully what now happens. Centripetal force reaches its maximum and begins to die, and centrifugal force takes over. Look again at the top diagram in Figure 42, and carefully note that the 4 rings of the inert gases are like the 4 rims of wheels placed within each other, with one common hub. Now note that the 4 rims become the hub when they are compressed and extended. Observe also that the extensions cause the appearance of cones as centripetal force winds the cone bases into a sun at the apex point of collision.
The electric current begins and ends at cathodes. Cathodes are still points in the zero universe from which the energy of desire for creation is expressed. Chemically, cathodes are the inert gases of the octaves, which are not elements, for they will not mix with them. They are the seed from which the elements spring and to which they return. From the spectrum standpoint, They are white light from which all colors extend when put under electric strain, and to which they return when the strain ceases. From the tonal point of view, they are the keynotes of the octave from which one can never escape knowledge of their presence in every tonal harmony. From the mathematical point of view, they are the zero of the whole octave. From the geometric form point of view, which its basis for motion gives it, the inert gas consists of 4 rings, one within the other.
Each octave of the elements grows from its inert gas, just as a tree grows from its seed. The inert gases record and store for repetition all that has gone before in that octave. In the middle leaf table of the elements, hydrogen is shown without an inert gas. This is as impossible as producing a child without parents.
That omnipresent point from which you have issued your body is the same point at which the visible mortal you becomes invisible and again assumes immortality. That one point in all this universe controls your every movement from your first one many millions of years ago to the last one, which consummates the idea of man as expressed by you. That one point is your soul of the universal soul. It is your mind of the universal mind, as one unit of creation.
You are one with that mind. In fact, you are that mind. Your body is the thinking and imagining of that mind. The eternal you is that center, and your eternal body is that series of 4 rings of fluorescent light, which is eternally wrapped around that centering soul of the eternal you. Those 4 rings are eternal records of you. They are as immortal as you are immortal. They are the microfilm of you yourself.
The illusion of motion deceives everyone, so that the profound laws have been written by scientists which don't have the slightest foundation of truth in them, much less the very fundamental laws that I could see behind the scenes. When I came back, I bought textbooks to find out the names of that which I knew in space, in the universe, in another way as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, and back to 0. That is all I needed to know. And the names of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., are in textbooks. Lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, one series of elements after another. But to me they were always 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 in everything. Whether that was the octave spectrum of color or the octave on the piano.
Today we're going to talk about sacred geometry, the Fibonacci sequence, the flower of life, the Merkaba, energy, frequency, and how all of these things impact each and every one of us in our lives, in our daily lives. So today we're going to talk about the Vesica Pisces. It is just the very rudimentary, basic beginnings of what we are, what this place is, and what kind of say-so we have in this place. As you just looked at those 3 images I shared with you on the Vesica Pisces, I want to talk about the basics of how important that even just those beginnings are a wonderful way for us to start. We are all working on setting our intentions on our Merkaba and also getting our Merkaba activated, and I hope that everybody is working on that because now we know that we are able to do this ourselves. Now let's talk a little more about the Vesica Pisces. The synchronicity of the universe is determined by certain mathematical constants which express themselves in the form of patterns and cycles in nature. The outcome of this process can be seen throughout the natural world, as you just seen with those very basic symbols that actually, resonate and radiate all the way through and through us and everything we see. I would call them the basic fingerprints. These days of mathematical and geometric constants are confirmation that certain proportions are woven into the very fabric of nature. Recognizing the significance of the simple fact offers us the means to understand how and why such matters were considered sacred. They and everything around us are a product of a delicate balance between chaos and order. The word geometry can be traced through its component parts. The word geo/metry comes from the Greek words of geos, meaning earth, and metron, meaning to measure, which together literally translates as the measuring of the earth, or earthly measurements. An art which was traditionally restricted to the priesthood. Think about that one, guys. It was hidden from the general population, but starting in the Greek times, was given out to the general population. Think about the Bible, half of it was written in Hebrew and half of it in Greek. Something to think about, guys. Sacred geometry has existed in many forms across the ages. It is often mistakenly said that geometry began with the Greeks, but before them was the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Chinese, the Phoenicians, and of course the builders of Western European megaliths, all of whom left clear geometric fingerprints in their greatest constructions. The Greeks may have well been the first to have offered geometry to the public, which is what I just said, at large, but they were by no means the first to recognize it. Sacred geometry, the first steps. Again, referring back to those images I showed you. One of the most common shapes in nature is the circle. It is therefore extremely significant to understand that all other geometric shapes can be determined from a circle. With the use of only a compass or string and a ruler, straight edge, as the following procedure illustrates. Yeah. Starting with the Vesica Pisces, which is one is able to produce. See, they're so simple. It's so simple, but then it just becomes this very beautiful, instant, and balanced way of living. There you can also find it in the Vesica Pisces. You can find the triangle, the hexagon, the pentagon, the square, so on and so on. The Vesica Pisces is one of the key starting blocks from which sacred geometry was applied to life. Yeah, what do you guys think about that? And this is going to be the first of many, as we are going to dive deep into the sacred geometry and the energetics, music, the Fibonacci, and many, many more to come. Have yourself a good day. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Michelle's Opinions. We're on this journey together. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. You may want to bookmark this page. You can sponsor the channel for as little as a cup of coffee a month. But if you bookmark this page, we can continue on with the work there, free of charge, on their platform. I will see you soon. I love you all so much. Have a great day. Peace.
holographic self-similarity follows in the magnetic model, but what magnetism is most definitely what people do not understand. As was said long ago by Faraday, magnetism is the dielectric field. Dielectricity is the inertia. The loss of that inertia manifests itself in a geometric form pattern, but that form pattern is not three-dimensional. It is resultantly and demonstrably so three-dimensional in that it has volume, but magnetism itself is two-dimensional. It is only resultantly three-dimensional and contains and creates volume. It is not voluminous, but it is by definition that which creates volume by nature of the mass which it must transverse. Here we can actually see the hypertoroidal pattern that you actually find underneath the ferrocell, as evidenced here from one of my videos, and here, as you can see 1,000 times over, the quote-unquote spirograph-like pattern that forms the construct. What these are constructive and destructive interferences, as commonly found in the double slit experiment, but unfortunately modern science, being the bullshit that it is, it thinks that light is both particle and wave, but it is neither particle nor is it a wave. A wave is not a thing, rather what something does. And certainly so, there's no such thing as a photon. That is misunderstanding the coaxial nature of light, which a longitudinal pulse perturbation with resultant transverse electrical magnetic components, necessitatively so, resultant to its propagation. But the propagation is in the field itself. Nothing is propagating in the sense of an object moving from point A to point B, but these are constructive and destructive interferences of the resultant divergent centrifugal magnetism interacting with the increasing inertia and acceleration of the centrifugal. But the centrifugal is not magnetism per se, not specifically denotatively, but we can say that it is so superficially so. This is the confusion of the misunderstanding by everybody in the world as to the conjugate nature and the relationship of magnetism to dielectricity. We can't say that the head side of a coin is something completely different than the tail side of the coin. Obviously, they both entail the coin. Or actually, specifically would be the case, the head and the tail would be the magnetism, but the silver of which the coin is made would be the dielectricity. You certainly do not have the magnetism without the dielectricity, or the dielectric silver, as if we were in that analogy. Let's take a look at the central toroid. We'll actually see here a two-dimensional model. Here we have a three-dimensional representation. This conjugate geometry, if we actually take the inverse of the toroid, we have the hourglass pattern of the hyperboloid, which forms the conjugate nature with the toroidal, the creation of not space and volume itself, but magnetism and space and volume are synonymous. The loss of that inertia as manifest three-dimensionally only resultant to the necessary mass which it must transverse, and which resultantly is the therefore a rise of phase, and is therefore the rise resultantly of voluminous gyromagnetic precession. We actually have to understand two-dimensional geometry. We have to understand what the hypertoroidal is. We also have to understand what gyromagnetic precession is. We can actually do, or you can do specifically, a lookup on what gyromagnetic precession is, and specifically two-dimensional Poincaré disk model of projective geometry, which necessitatively spells out the nature of a two-dimensional model as projected in three-dimensional geometry. Now let's actually show that with a really, really simple program here. Here you can actually see the pattern of the ferrocell on this simple two-dimensional pattern, which will draw out in 360 degrees a circle. Well, you don't see a circle here, you see a top-down view of the torus, obviously so. And here we have it underneath the ferrocell of constructive and destructive interference. And of course we have the black spot where no constructive or destructive interference is occurring. We have the top part of the hyperboloid, or the top of the hourglass if you were, showing the field geometry of increasing inertia and acceleration, i.e. the dielectric. The two of these together are the conjugate, which define one another. The dielectric defines the magnetic, and the magnetic defines the field geometry of the dielectric. So let's erase this and start over, and here's where we'll have to understand, and you'll have to research what it is the Poincaré disk model of projective geometry. And all I'm going to do I needed to find the center to do this. All I'm going to do is draw a circle as best I can. Only a circle, but it will be manifest in replication in 360 degrees opposite to where I'm drawing it, and also 90 degrees and 45 degrees and so on. I think with 18 manifestations, but all I'm doing is drawing a simple circle. But here we have, and let's do it again, except try to be more perfect since I'm doing this by hand. Here we have the hypertrochoidal pattern, which shows the magnetic circle. The only way the loss of inertia manifests itself is the manifestation of a circle. It's a two-dimensional circle, but magnetism is three-dimensional, or is the creation of three-dimensional space. But this is necessitatively only due and resultant to the mass that it is three-dimensional. Magnetism itself, if we were to take a point of inertia, which is certainly so a nonsensical term since there is no point, inertia itself is non-Cartesian. It is by definition counter space in the true definition of what energy is. But if we were to take a single point and apply the loss of that inertia, which follows 1 over 5 to the power of -3, we will see what we have is actually just a two-dimensional circle, where the loss of pure potential is Cartesianally manifest in a circle and replicated here in fullness. You'll actually see we actually have what appears to be a three-dimensional top-down torus. And this, of course, is what we see in the ferrocell. Magnetism is two-dimensional. Inertia, the loss of that inertia, and this, of course, is perfectly in line with the holographic model of the nature of the universe. Magnetism is only three-dimensional, resultant to the nature of the mass by which it must, if coherent, reciprocate itself to termination. Really, it is an expanding circle. Nothing is moving like my cursor is currently, moving outwards as you see my cursor is moving. We actually have, technically, I could draw this same two-dimensional geometry by showing an increasing circle going from an infinitesimally small point, will actually be a counterpoint in counter space, to a larger and larger and larger and larger and larger circle. So that would actually be, according to the geometry of the nature of magnetism, the way in which I would, quote, draw the loss of inertia would be an increasing circle instead of a point moving out and then moving back again, kind of like a comet going around the sun. It would just be an increasing circle and then a decreasing one. Upon termination, nothing is emitted by the loss of that inertia from counter space, but saying from implies our Cartesian coordinate, but counter space has no point by which we may define from. So we would actually have to imagine this as an expanding circle and then a contracting one, and then apply our understanding of geomagnetic precession, because the loss of inertia and polarity is only denotatively the inverse of counter space. There's obviously no such thing as a monopole, but polarity two-dimensionally is not a north pole and a south pole. A magnet doesn't have poles, it has the inverse of counter space. The loss of that inertia is manifest, obviously so three-dimensionally, resultant to the mass of which it is present therein, i.e. the coherent magnetic field. So we not only have the divergence and the phase, but we have the geomagnetic precession, which draws out, if you will, for lack of a better term, this toroidal, because the inverse image of this torus is the hyperboloid, the hourglass that is the negative image of a torus. The inverse of an hourglass is a torus, and the inverse of a torus is the hyperboloid. These form the geometry of force and motion, and the inverse geometry to that, inertia and acceleration. Everything begins with inertia and acceleration, within which we actually have a rate of decay of loss of inertia, which therefore manifests itself resultantly as the hypertrochoidal two-dimensional, or the magnetic field. But magnetism is not something different from dielectricity. Magnetism is just the manifestation of dielectricity. I kind of drew that really crooked. Magnetism is the manifestation of dielectricity as resultant to the loss of its energy, which is counter space, is pure potential, is pure energy, pure non-Cartesian actuality. This is true power is rest, not manifestation of power. One might think ignorantly as any human being would, that power would be an atomic bomb going off, for example. Well, that's true power, one might think. But obviously it's just the inverse of that, magnetism being analogous to the explosion itself, but that is impotency. The release of that power, the release of that energy is force and motion. It is the absolute loss of true power. True power would be that 3-pound lump of plutonium that sits in your hand like an innocent baseball. I mean, that is true power. That is about the closest analogy I could draw. I kind of drew that crooked there. It's hard to draw a perfect circle freehand like this on a computer screen to get the hypertrochoidal pattern, but I think you get it now. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, just click the link below. Anything to expand your mind. But this is the secret of Mother Nature, the conjugate nature of magnetism and dielectricity. Both are inextricably connected at the very core. One, magnetism is not something different than dielectricity. Magnetism would what we'd be calling, what we would denotatively and ignorantly call force, but it's not force. It is simply the loss of inertia that we understand to be dielectricity, or the counterspatial pure energy of the nature of the universe. Its manifestation being force and motion. We therefore call it something else, even though it is not something else. We call it magnetism, but there is not an autonomous field modality known as magnetism. It is simply an expression of the loss of the potential of dielectricity, which must only and necessitatively form the geometry which we call magnetism, which is the creation of space and volume and force and motion. All of these are one and the same thing. That's the power as manifest, but not the power in true, which is completely unmanifest, necessitatively and logically so.